tortile idea, triangular plan, bring natural light and ventilation through the entire height of the tower. That took us to many things, and one of them is in your city here, the Hertz Tower, but took us to Swiss Re, the insurance company in the city of London, where, because it's a small floor plate and the core needs to be in the center rather than the corners, the dark elements you see here are actually a series of rotated but stacked atriums, which he was hoping would become a flue. He was also hoping they would be planted. They've been constrained since their construction because of the need of multi-tenant floors and how those are partitioned out. But the idea was, again, that verticality, and he's made it in a tortile pattern, so it becomes kind of a decorative effect on the skin of the building. Ken Yang, although educated mostly in the UK, is from Malaysia, has a very different approach, and the formal expression of his work is different. This is actually his house from 1984, so it's not a tall building, but if you see the next two buildings, I think you'll see the relationship. This was his house, and he called it the roof house. The roof meaning there's a roof, and then it's important that there's another roof. And the other roof allows ventilation. It allows shade on the real roof as far as insulation and solar radiation. Windows are deep, they're highly framed, they're operable. There are outdoor spaces which are also in shade, which allows ventilation to occur laterally and allows people to be in shade on the outside. So the outside of the building is somewhat ambiguous and permeable, so living can happen inside and outside with some level of comfort. And if you take that and then look at the next picture, this is the name of a project I can't well pronounce in Indonesian, in Malaysian. So I'll just say it was a 15-story tower for IBM outside of Kuala Lumpur. But again, you can see the idea of a sort of highly shaded top of the building, the interest in getting the top to be something that was an anchor, really, for both shade but also for mechanical equipment and perhaps telephonic equipment as well in its day. There are large sort of cutouts in the building which allow shade to be back in. People can come out of the skin of the building. There's forward skin and an interior skin, which causes this to become a shading device against the exterior of the building. It's in a kind of a wildly expressionistic way, and it reminds me of some of the work, some mechanistic work of the architects in the 60s in the UK where he was educated. But again, he talks about this as being a biofilter or a permeable skin where air and shade and light can move through to skin. So that's what he's made of it. Next. And the buildings become more mechanistic, which you can begin to see, although they take a kind of a transformer-like quality. But again, they're sort of inside and outside with shaded facades and depth in the wall and habitable spaces and shade outside. And now we're beginning to see some landscape, which is in the lower regions, beginning to work out through the building.
What period is that?
That building was in 1995, and he's since merged with a large firm, Llewellyn Davies and Yang, so he's sort of annexed himself, but he really worked up until just a few years ago, pushing all of these things. And frankly, a number of the projects, the IBM Building was built, many of those projects, and frankly, in my humble view, many of his best projects haven't been built because they probably just challenged the norms of construction and costs and double, triple layers and all of that. But they're very interesting in the world of ideas as promoting others to think about how to do these things. Echo City, about the year 2000, about the same here, a proposal for Kuala Lumpur. And again, Echo City takes the tower idea and showing you it brings it into the lateral ground plane, connects it with open space circulation, cityscape, and this building sort of begins to be gnawed away in more and more ways. It's really has more negative space in it and more landscape as it climbs up the building. Designer Skyscraper. I have to be careful talking about this in New York, but in fact, the next shot. Designer Skyscraper in the book is really about the relatively recent phenomenon of the identity of the designer and the luxury tall building, usually residence, I think I would observe, the kind of closeness of that in the marketing and the communication of the building. And I'm not making the position that Richard Meyer's buildings on Charles and Perry initiated or started this, but it was certainly happening at a time when we were beginning to be aware of the relationship to this and how the consumption of these buildings it became less clear if the consumption or utility of them was any different than the way that other luxury objects in our world in general are being consumed, communicated, sold, consumed as well. These were important buildings sort of marking that, and they kind of marked the turn of the 20th to the 21st century. And they were very identifiably, both in communications and in, I would say, formal style, identifiably put with Richard Meyer and his own career, his own approach to design. Next. This sort of approach of communicating a building could actually remake sites. It's been much talked about how the Bowery may not be a place you would have thought to live, but this might be the thing that would bring you here. Or in the West Village, you would live in a certain way, but when all of a sudden there were 1, 2, or 3 buildings on the edge of the West Village there, would you live there? New York is a wonderful experimentation location, and we admire it from California, from many places in the United States, because there's such an intense market. Things can happen with a density here that seems to not be able to happen elsewhere. But the buildings, in every case, are iconically unique and identifiable, and they're communicated to a prospective market for that, and with the identity of the designer, this Bernard Shinjuku, this designer, of course. Next. And it's talking about South Street, a project which, at the prices that it was described, I'm not sure it's going ahead right now, but I remember knowing of it several years ago, and it's a series of, I guess, quadplexes, individual buildings, individual residences, very super tall, by Santiago Calatrava. And I remember maybe 3 to 4 years ago, they said that each unit would be about $25 million per unit. So I'm not sure in today's climate whether that's being rethought or we're waiting for things to come back to where we were before. But it's an interesting building and has a lot of the elements, particularly the tortile elements that Calatrava has studied in Malmo and other projects. Some built, some purely theoretical.
It may still be built.
Sorry?
It may still be.
Marvin says it makes still be built. It'll certainly add to what we know in tall buildings. And of course, in many cities beyond New York, that idea of identity of the designer and the uniqueness of the icon is key. This is actually in Los Angeles, across from Disney Hall, which is here, our Symphony Hall. This is by Frank Gehry's office, and this is a new tower called the Grand Avenue Project. This is an apartment building. There's a lot of residential in the base and the podium here. This project is stopped, or stalled at least for the present moment. People are hoping it will come back for the reasons we all know. But again, this in downtown Los Angeles would be very iconic, very unique. It's kind of a high point, Bunker Hill in downtown LA. And then a building which would be very unique in Chicago by Jeannie Gang and Studio Gang. Really a rectangular building, for those of you thinking like designers, whose edges, those horizontal plates, whose balconies are undulated. And there have been several buildings actually ahead of this, one I can think of in Miami, who've already sort of done that, to sort of take a more or less conventional shape and then develop a very unique image around that shape. Okay? Future Tall is a chapter in the book, which is about where does tall go moving forward. And next, please. And it goes in other places, as many of us know, beyond the United States. I put this picture in because this is a kind of a well-known photograph by Thomas Truth, the German photographer and artist. And it's a picture of a location in Shinjuku, those of you that know Tokyo. And it reminds us about how a repetition of systems can achieve huge banality. And against that system, so many developments here, abroad, elsewhere, are looking for uniqueness at any cost. And I think it's possible as a designer to err either way. These buildings are different, but really not. And you can make buildings that are different, and in some ways indulge meaningless form making as well. But I think this is an interesting anchor from which to consider the huge manufacture of tall buildings. I'll mention the statistics, which I've heard, and I mentioned it in the book, that by the year 2008, calculations are that half of the tall buildings in the world have been built since the year 2000. So half of all the tall buildings have built in 8 years. So clearly there's an enormous push. I think we're all looking at that right now. I'm sure that will continue at that same level. But that's what's happened in the last years. And strangely, if you think of Ground Zero and the event